sounds good. Hello. All right. Yeah, rough start. I think we got over it, though. Look, I thank you all for being here. You came on a great day in Albany. We got great weather for you here. Thank you for being here. I know the WebEx is on, so we got a lot of folks joining us from the WebEx. Thank you for being here as well. I just want to say that both John and I are up here to make sure that you understand that we have been working very closely on this issue for a number of months, and we're so excited that we were able to issue the Brattle report earlier this month. Actually, Brattle released it, but we're so happy that they were able to get that out. Let me talk to you about kind of how we got here. I mean, the starting point is that our markets are not designed to incorporate environmental attributes or issues into the markets themselves. The markets were originally designed for the purpose of, should I hold this closer? For the purpose of achieving reliability at the lowest possible cost. Reliability at the lowest possible cost. The environment wasn't built into that structure. Now, the markets have worked extraordinarily well over the last 18 years, providing close to $8 billion of value to consumers of New York. But the question now is, should we bring an environmental attribute into that market dispatch? That's the question that we asked Brattle to look at. And really, we were asked to do that by our market participants. The state of New York has been very much out in the forefront for the nation in addressing these issues. And so we wanted to see, based on the request from our MPs, whether or not we could incorporate this into the marketplace. And that's when we hired Brattle. And so I was so thrilled to have Sam join. Thank you for being here today, but also thank you for being on the project. It's been great working with you. Sam's been working on this for 9 months or so, something close to 9 months, and has done an incredible job with this report. We're really at the beginning of this, though. Okay? We're really starting this process. We had the opportunity, as I said, to do something great, to do something nation-leading, but we're really at the beginning. We're kicking the tires of this thing. Sam's done a wonderful job of giving us a concept to look at. Sam's done a wonderful job of testing out various parts of it, but where we're going to go to next is that we need market participants and stakeholders to engage in this process. I need your commitment of time and effort. I need you to poke holes at this. Sam knows that there's pressure points. I need you to push on those buttons, and we'll test each of those pieces out, and we'll do additional sensitivity analysis. And my hope is that in time, we'll be able to convince all of ourselves that this is the right way to go. By integrating carbon into our markets, we potentially, as Sam would say in his report, can get a lower reduction in carbon output at roughly the same cost for consumers. That's what we need to test, whether that's the concept that we're on. So without any further ado, I want to turn it over to John. John, would you say a few words?
Thank you much. Thank you to all of the partners at NYISO. Thank you, everybody in the room, for paying attention to this topic. You're volunteering for work. I hope you realize that, and we're going to count on it, and we're going to need it. So let's start with acknowledging the significance of today's topic and of the work that we've been developing in partnership with the NYISO in order to, look at how we might go about developing a process, developing a proposal to harmonize the operation of the wholesale energy markets with the state's policy goals, namely to decarbonize the electric system. And we're all familiar with the actions that have brought us here today by the state. We've got state goals, state energy plan, 50 by 30, 40 by 30, 50% of renewables by 30, including a clean energy standard that now established that as a mandate with teeth, that includes a zero emissions standard, ZEX, to avoid the premature closure of our nuclear fleet on the mission of decarbonizing our system, reducing our emissions in the most cost-effective, energy modernizing way. So as we've been doing that, our design principles have been simple. We need to have an energy system that's clean and that's cost-effective. The Clean Energy Standard is designed around the principles of carbon reduction, backing carbon out of the system in the most cost-effective manner. And this was what we were doing, while at the same time NYISO participants Brad decided to take on the highly related issue of carbon pricing in the markets and engage with Brattle. And you, Sam, were engaged to evaluate conceptual design options just to see if there was a there. And you've done really good work, and you've produced something that, in our shared view, is a really important first resource for our joint work, joint between DPS and NYISO, but joint between all of us as we go forward to figure out how one would really do this, how one would operationalize carbon pricing in the wholesale market. We're committed to exploring this, and we're committed to exploring this because we know that if carbon pricing in the wholesale markets can be the right instrument for enabling the state policies, then that's something we want to do. Carbon pricing as an instrument is a compelling idea, and that's the thing that we want to explore with you. So we're here kicking off a process. It's going to be highly shared, and we look forward to a lot of collaboration. I've talked about the collaboration that's already underway between the NYISO and DPS, but we also need your collaboration. We need the input and expertise that's in this room and in the larger community. We look to all actors. We look to market participants broadly defined, and we look to everybody with insights, perspective, analytical thoughts about how to do this thing, because we need to engage all stakeholders, all smart thinkers on this topic if we're going to pull it off, because the potential is so high. And if it's there, we're going to go seize it. So with that, let me turn it over to Sam.
Excellent. Please welcome Sam.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Brad. And it's good to be here with all of you. Oops. All right, I'll start here. I'm here today to describe to you the work that we've done that John and Brad just described. And the purpose is to inform this question, whether and how New York should introduce carbon pricing into its wholesale electricity markets. And the concept is appealing as a way to harmonize the markets and the state policies, hopefully in order to achieve the state goals, which include both having reliable energy and meeting environmental goals, and to do that in the most cost-effective way possible. And so what we've looked at is how might that be implemented? How might carbon pricing be implemented? What would be the effects on emissions, on economic efficiency, and customer cost? So we've done an analysis of those things. And again, as you'll see, there are quite a few assumptions that go into the analysis, but I think what we've done is create a good framework, good initial estimates, good framework for thinking about this. And the purpose of today is for you to understand what we've done, and for you then to be able to provide your feedback for the steps going forward. So what I'm going to talk about first is just a brief overview of the purpose and the context. Try not to repeat too much of what John and Brad just told you. And then I'll walk through what we found about potential designs, emissions, economic efficiency, customer costs, and then finally have a little discussion on some of the market design issues, like how you deal with allocating carbon charges, how you deal with border charges. So start with the study purpose, and this is what we were asked to do. We were asked to explore whether and how New York could incorporate carbon pricing into the wholesale market as a way to more efficiently pursue environmental and energy policies. And so the purpose of our study was two things. One is to look at how to do that, and then to look at the potential impacts on market outcomes. And throughout this process, DPS, especially sort of through the spring and early summer, DPS and NYISO provided their comments on the methodology and on the accuracy of the presentation. And as we said, this is really a first step in a process involving stakeholders, New York ISO, and DPS. So just to recap, the context here is New York already has very serious and firm environmental goals. So starting with a state energy policy and the objective to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, 80% by 2050. So these are serious goals, and that's economy-wide. This is the state really, among a few other states, taking the lead on this issue. And which is obviously playing a really important role, given that this is not happening at the federal level. Then the Clean Energy Standard turned those goals into mandates and provided mechanisms to help meet those goals, primarily through purchasing RACs from renewables, new renewables, and ZECs to help keep the clean nuclear fleet online. And then the Clean Energy Standard is complementing several other policies, and that includes participation in RGGI, the reforming the energy vision, energy efficiency standards, and the governor's plan to eliminate coal by 2020. And it's worth also remembering, since the decarbonization goals are economy-wide, it's likely that some of the other sectors will have to electrify, at least to some significant degree, including transportation, HVAC. And it's also likely that the electric sector will have to decarbonize by a larger percentage, even than the Clean Energy Standard contemplates. And that is why these are ambitious goals, and this is why it's really important to look for ways to achieve them in the most cost-effective way and effective way possible. As Brad described, the New York wholesale markets have a great track record of meeting energy needs reliably at low cost. But those markets do not, other than RGGI, incorporate in the environmental objectives, especially the carbon objectives. And so they're actually not aligned, the wholesale markets and the policy goals. The wholesale markets will look for ways to produce energy at the lowest possible cost. That's not the same thing as reducing emissions. And meanwhile, the policies can have an effect on the wholesale market, for example, leading to very negative prices when when renewables are on the margin. Now, if you had a carbon pricing on any emissions during generation, that could align the wholesale markets with the environmental policy goals. And the idea, this is not a new idea. This is the idea of internalizing environmental externalities into a market to get a more efficient outcome. And what it could do that targeted policies alone cannot is put a price into the market so that all different resources can compete to meet energy and environmental goals jointly in the least possible cost. So putting a price into the market can give you all sorts of responses that targeted policies alone might not. So, for example, shifting commitment and dispatch within the existing fleet. There's going to be a vast investment in renewables send a better price signal for the renewables to go to places where the energy price, including carbon, is higher, where they're going to actually be displacing more emissions. To the extent there's going to be any, to the extent there likely will be further investment in fossil, there is investment occurring today. Push that investment towards the most, the cleanest technologies. We're going to see a lot more technologies with storage and demand response at customer sites. Give them a signal to shift load from from high emitting hours to low emitting hours. Incentivize energy efficiency and conservation. And spur other innovations, and that's just a sort of a catch-all, because I assure you there are things that we have not thought of that are not on the list, that the market will find if you put a price out there. A little bit like how many of us expected when we had a market for capacity that so much demand response would emerge. It was not something any of the planners were imagining, but if you put a price out in the market such that all different kinds of resources can compete to meet the need, you get surprised by what the market can come up with. So that was the context and the question we looked at. The question next is, okay, how would you put a price on carbon in the market? And there's several possible mechanisms. And again, these ideas have been talked about for a long time. What is exciting now is that New York has actually committed to these goals to decarbonize, and now is actually talking about what's the best way to implement that, and that might include doing carbon pricing. These, I work with a lot of economists. We've been talking about this stuff for years. This is not new. What is new is the idea to actually do it. And and of course, some of this already exists through RGGI, and RGGI just announced its new targets, tighter. And so one question is whether to just work through RGGI. And that is an amazing cooperation of several states. They don't, of course, all have exactly the same goals, and so it's hard to do something unilaterally go beyond RGGI as a single state. By the way, this has evolved since we did our report, and sort of just thinking through now the implications of RGGI being tighter. But one thing that's important about that is that RGGI to me doesn't feel designed as sort of the driver of decarbonization. It more is tracking the many states sort of agreed upon goals. The price is, even with the cost containment reserve, not going to get above the teens. So it's not, even though in quantity terms it may be in the ballpark of what New York aims to do with decarbonizing the electric sector, it's it's not going to give you the same price that we're talking about in this context, corresponding to the social cost of carbon that the PSC has adopted. So anyway, I'm nothing against RGGI. It's just that we're talking about whether to add something to put in a bigger price than what RGGI is doing, a higher price. So other mechanisms could be New York only cap and trade. That could be a possibility. As another layer on top of RGGI. Another possibility would be carbon tax. That's something economists have talked about a lot. I sort of eventually realized people don't really like talking about that. It just sort of immediately creates opponents. But the idea of a carbon charge is somewhat similar to that. But the idea is it's actually fairly simple, and it does not involve any tax authority. What it would be is simply the New York ISO could put a charge in the commitment and dispatch on any generators that are emitting CO2. That would be the mechanism, and that would flow through to commitment, dispatch, and settlement. And this is the mechanism we focused on because it would be fairly straightforward to implement, and not dismissing the other ideas entirely, but this is something that New York ISO could implement. The idea is also that the PSC could set the carbon price, in fact, could set a carbon price trajectory, because that's actually really important, not just something that sort of you decide every year. And then the idea, too, is so if you're charging all the generators for any emissions, there's a pot of money. And then where does that money go? We're assuming that could go to customers to offset the, to help offset the cost of adding a carbon price into the market. And so just so you understand the intuition, the marginal price setting generator in the market would now have, it would have a higher cost, but it would also be getting a higher price. So it would just, if it's the same marginal generator without a carbon price, it would just break even. But if you have inframarginal generators that are, lower cost, more efficient, lower emissions than the one at the margin, they'd actually be making a little bit more money, right? Because the price goes up more than they are charged. And I'll walk through the implications of that later. But that's the concept that we especially focused on. Hold on. Oops. The analysis that we did was to look at how a carbon charge would affect emissions, economic efficiency, and customer costs. How did we do that? We looked at just a 2025 snapshot to provide an indicator. And we compared a case with a $40 carbon charge, and that's based on the adopted social cost of carbon minus an estimate of the RGGI price that we had in 2025. And what we did is we just compared a case with the carbon charge to a case without the carbon charge, but still having CES and RGGI. So this is not like we're looking at the costs of decarbonizing versus not. It's using this mechanism versus not. And we set it up in a spreadsheet model to make it easy to look at a lot of different uncertainties, because there are a lot of uncertainties as you look to the future about what future market conditions are and about how the market would respond to a carbon charge. So there are two analytical components. One is really just the direct effect that is probably the most obvious piece and easiest to quantify, and that is when you put this charge on all the generators, you're going to raise the price. In fact, the marginal price setting unit based on its emissions rate, that'll go into setting the market price. The market price for energy will rise. And now consequently also, when I say static analysis, I mean before thinking about any changes in the dispatch or investment. But so you have a higher energy price. By the way, that would also translate to, you also get the carbon charges to customers. And then the other, what I'm calling static piece, is that the price of future RECs and ZECs would go down. It'd go down because if a carbon charge raises the wholesale price of energy, then somebody investing in renewables doesn't need as high a REC price to be willing to enter. So that's what I'm calling the static piece. The dynamic piece asks the question, how do operations and investment change? In response to a carbon charge. And I mentioned on the last couple slides ago what some of those effects are. I'll show you in a minute how we tried to quantify these dynamic effects. And then finally, the last piece of our analysis, which I'll also show you today, is we conducted a lot of uncertainty analyses, a lot of sensitivities to show how the results change under different assumptions about future market conditions and how the market responds to a carbon charge. So let me talk first about the impact on emissions and economic efficiency, and then we'll get to the customer cost. So we evaluated 4 ways that a carbon charge could change investment and operations in the market. So actually, let me first mention what we did not include is changes in the dispatch in the existing fleet. So this is not a system that has a lot of coal. In fact, we're assuming there's no coal by 2025. So there's not a lot of opportunity for sort of interfuel switching. There still would be some benefits from, not every plant has the same fuel price and efficiency. There would be benefits to lowering emissions in the commitment and dispatch, but we didn't capture those. What we did include is 4 effects. And now, what I'm going to show you here, there are a number of assumptions that go into these. And this is the most uncertain part of our analysis. What we tried to do is come up with reasonable assumptions to give an indicator of what plausibly might the effects be. By the way, we've seen other studies of this kind of thing. What happens if you put a carbon price in? They assume these are sort of the harder part of the analysis. So sometimes there's just an assumption that there's nothing. That is wrong. You put a price in the market, there is a response. And so we took a shot at that. And one of the effects is to tilt investment in renewables towards better locations where the price is higher now because of the carbon adder, making the price higher in places that have highest emissions. So we assumed that about 2,000 megawatts, and there's going to be thousands of megawatts of new wind and solar going in because of the clean energy standard. So we assumed that 2,000 megawatts would go to slightly better locations, like the difference between some of the upstate zones and some of the downstate zones. And that saves, I think, about a little less than 1 million tons a year, if that happens. About almost 1 million tons a year of CO2 emissions if the renewables that are built go to slightly better locations. The second effect we looked at is pushing any investment in fossil generation towards the most efficient technologies. So we estimated that, remember, with a carbon price, the wholesale price is higher, and actually combined cycles would be rewarded for their relative efficiency compared to the marginal unit. They would be making close to $30 a kilowatt year more money from the carbon charge. And so you expect, if they're economic, you'd expect more to enter the market. We do have CCs entering the market. You'd expect a little bit more to enter the market because they're being rewarded in that way. But because they're displacing higher emitting technologies, they're displacing peakers and old steam units. There's some emission savings with that. And that amounts to a little over half a ton of CO2 per year. 500,000 tons of CO2 per year. And again, that is under the assumption that about 700 megawatts of additional CCs come into the market. A little slice that you'll see here is incorporating storage and demand response. We just made the sort of assumed there'd be a modest amount of that. We assumed 500 megawatts that, due to the price signal from the carbon, would now be incentivized to shift load from the most emitting hours to the least emitting hours, and that would have emission savings too. And then the other one, incentivizing energy efficiency and conservation. This is over 1 million tons per year under the assumptions we made, which is that the largest customers would see a higher per kilowatt hour cost of energy. Because remember, the wholesale energy price is higher. We're assuming that the carbon refund that we talked about, which means their rates, as you'll see later, overall costs wouldn't substantially increase. But you might have the volumetric component increase, the per kilowatt hour increase, because that reflects the wholesale energy price. Carbon refunds could be, if they're returned in a different way, now you actually have incentives for these customers to use less. So we're assuming about a third of the load, the largest C&I loads, and reasonable assumptions on price elasticity. They use about 5% less, and you get savings from that too. So again, you might think, oh, well, we don't know that these effects will occur exactly as we said. I think something of this sort will happen, and we made assumptions that are transparent about what their magnitudes would be. So again, this is a basis for looking into the benefits further. And I'll tell you, I think that the assumptions are reasonable and give you a plausible estimate. They could be twice what we said. They could be half what we said. And now when you put all those effects together, the carbon charge would reduce, it would basically help the market find cost-effective ways to reduce emissions that wouldn't occur without the carbon charge, adding to a little over 2.5 million tons a year. And let's see, that is roughly, I forgot the exact number, but it's roughly a 10% reduction in what we're projecting the emissions would be for 2025. So it's meaningful. And now, that is an improvement in emissions. How does that translate into cost savings? So these are low cost, or at least inframarginal abatement opportunities that the market would find with a price. If you are achieving these additional reductions, then you don't have to do as many costlier measures to reduce emissions. And that's how it can save money. So for example, RECs they're not inframarginal in the energy market. REC prices are positive, right? It means they need more than what's in the energy market. And if you had a carbon charge giving you all these other sources of abatement, then if you wanted to meet the same goal of carbon reductions, you could buy less of something else like RECs. And I'm not suggesting doing less than what the Clean Energy Standard calls for. The RECs, it's a proxy for, I mean, it's going to be challenging to meet the decarbonization goals. And you're going to need more than just the RECs under the Clean Energy Standard. But you can do a little less of them if you find the low-cost solutions through the energy market. And so if you actually take those savings, those emission savings, and multiply by what we're projecting the REC price would be in 2025, even with a carbon charge of $19 a megawatt hour, the savings would be $120 million a year. That is value created. The same emissions as without a carbon charge, but at a total economic cost of $120 million less, because you found low-cost solutions instead of the sort of above-market solutions. So that is a lot of the reason to do this. And again, this is based on what we assumed how the market would respond to a fairly substantial carbon charge. There are effects we didn't capture. It may be more, maybe less than this. The other reason to do it, of course, we talk about harmonizing the state goals and the wholesale markets. It would, there are reasons beyond this why that's attractive. So one is that you have greater economic efficiency. That's what we just talked about. But the other is you have better price formation in the energy market. So you can get away from some of these highly subsidized or high out-of-market payments distorting prices in the market. That's the other reason to do it. All right, so we talked about how there. Actually, let me put that up. Yeah. We talked about how there would be reductions in emissions, or you could translate that into economic savings. So then the question is, though, I think on the top of a lot of people's mind, is how do customers share in those savings? Or does somehow putting a carbon price in the market effectuate a wealth transfer from customers to suppliers, like existing clean suppliers, for example? So, if this has a major increase in customer costs, I mean, be realistic. It's not going to happen, right? And so the question is, what is the impact on customer costs? And to do that, I'll show you in a minute what all the components are of that analysis. But what we found is that on net, it amounts to somewhere between a 1% reduction in total customer costs on customer bills to a 2% increase. And our central value was about a 1% increase. And in terms of cents a kilowatt hour, the central value that we estimated was a little less than 0.2 cents a kilowatt hour increase, but it could be anywhere from minus 0.15 cents a kilowatt hour, sort of average customer bill, to plus about $4.50 dollars a megawatt hour, which is almost half of a cent a kilowatt hour. And we also found that the impacts vary by zone, but those differences could be eliminated if you allocated the carbon charges back to customers in a targeted by zone. And so you can decide yourself whether those increases are material, but they are, the key insight here, which I'll show you in the next couple of slides, is that sort of the naive analysis of this problem is, energy prices will go up $20 a megawatt hour. That's going to raise everybody's costs. That's before counting a lot of effects that I'll show you take away about 90%, plus or minus 90%. Well, it's actually minus 90, but there's some uncertainty around it of that effect. So the naive analysis way overstates what's happening to customer costs, and that's what we found. And I'll show you that. So that is what I'm calling the naive effect, and it's it's the most obvious piece of this. If you were to put a $40 a ton carbon charge into the market, look, the average marginal emissions rate in the market's about half a ton a megawatt hour, rule of thumb. So it would raise wholesale energy prices almost $20 a megawatt hour, like 2 cents a kilowatt hour, that is. But everything from there is there are a lot of offsets. So the first one, of course, is the carbon revenue. And that would offset about half the effect, assuming that goes back to customers. And why is it, just to give you some intuition, why is it about half the effect? It's because the average emissions rate in the fleet, which includes a lot of nuclear and renewable generation, right? The average emissions rate in the fleet, which corresponds to how much you're going to collect in total into the carbon fund, is about half the emissions rate of the marginal unit. That is what's setting the price. The price is the effect in the red bar all the way on the left. The carbon fund is this piece we're talking about here. And it covers about half the customer impact from the wholesale energy price itself. But there are other offsets too. So ZEC prices would go down, and we're projecting in 2025 that ZEC prices would be $5 a megawatt hour. There are uncertainties around that. We'll look at that with sensitivity analyses. But a carbon price would bring that down to zero, and that would save customers money. And similarly, REC prices. There are going to be a growing number of RECs. So new Tier 1 resources presumably would be willing to accept a lower rec price if the wholesale energy price that they're earning is higher. And now the volume is not as high as with ZECs. By 2025, there are more ZECs than there are RECs, but the price impact is greater. Because remember, ZECs, we said, go from just $5 to 0, and they can't go below 0. And the RECs, we're estimating, fall from $34 a megawatt hour without a carbon charge to $19 a megawatt hour with a carbon charge in 2025. And that saves customers money if they're getting their RECs for less. So the next piece is small in our base case analysis, but much bigger in some other cases we ran, and that is the value of transmission congestion contracts. So with a carbon charge, price spreads actually increase, especially between upstate and downstate or across Central East. Price spreads increase, and that means in some ways we've exaggerated the effect on customers if you just look at LBMPs. Customers also get the benefit of transmission congestion contracts that gives them some of that back. Some of the like the downstate customers have, scratch that. It's just, you can see that the transmission congestion contracts would be worth more when price spreads are a little higher with the carbon charge. Just like price spreads go up when fuel prices rise. Okay, so all of those, before I get to this next one, oops. All right, so all the effects that we just talked about so far, they take away 2/3 of the price impact from just that sort of obvious, increase in wholesale energy prices. That takes away 2/3, but there's still about 1/3, so customer costs would still go up. But that is before assuming any changes to operations or investment. So now we come to what we're calling the dynamic analysis. So remember, one of the effects that we said that would happen with a carbon charge, combined cycles are, they're being invested in, there's investment in combined cycles now. All else equal, they would make more with a carbon charge that rewards their relative efficiency compared to the marginal unit in the energy market. And so again, I told you that we estimated that something like 700 megawatts could come in before the price re-equilibrates, right? You don't expect, if they were just earning their cost of capital before the carbon charge, now you give them this bonus because they're earning more because of carbon charge. They would be earning more than they need. You'd expect more entry until the prices come back down and they're just earning their cost of capital. And so again, with the energy prices and capacity prices coming down a little bit with some new entry, that saves customers money. For simplicity, we only looked at this impact for combined cycles, but you'd also see some of this effect if a carbon charge also gives you more storage, more other clean energy investments of various types, some clean imports. So any of those market responses would also have this. The thing is, static analyses, which are sort of what you might do back of the envelope, it was more than back of the envelope, but when we did the first half of the analysis, that always overstates price impacts. It always overstates price impacts because markets respond, and then the markets re-equilibrate. And that's what we're attempting to capture here. And then another piece, so do you remember when we estimated that about 2.5 million tons a year of emissions reduction induced by the carbon price? You could translate that into customer savings if you say, oh, okay, we don't need to do as many other sort of out-of-market, higher cost measures. And so that saves money. It doesn't look that large on this diagram because we're crediting it at, we're saying, okay, you don't have to buy as many RECs, but we're counting it at a REC price that's fairly low because the REC price would be fairly low in the presence of a carbon charge. So this number doesn't end up looking that big, but don't be fooled by that. It's because we counted the effect of lowering, we already counted the effect of lowering the rec price in that bar. We don't want to double count. So there's a lot of sort of accounting here to make sure we're not double counting or failing to count some of these interactions. So where does that bring us? So that's how we got to the not $20 a megawatt hour, but 1.7 impact on customer cost, or 0.17 cents a kilowatt hour. That's what that brings us to. I want to point out that the static analysis is, it does depend on sort of the ballpark amount of emissions you have, the marginal emission rate, the quantity of RECs and ZECs, but it's not all that uncertain compared the dynamic piece is more uncertain. Again, I think it could be plausibly half what we said or twice what we said. But I'll show you some uncertainty analyses in a second. All of the variables that we looked at still have approximately the same answer, that this combination of offsets makes the net impact on customers still much, much less than if you look at the red bar alone. And that in all cases it's, close to, it's a small impact on customer cost. Again, you can have your own interpretation of what small is, but again, it's small compared to the red, and it's small compared to the total customer bill. And I'll describe some of those uncertainty analyses in a second. And then the other effect I want to point out is the variation across zones. So some zones have higher marginal emission rate. They might have more of an impact, on energy prices. But it doesn't vary a ton across zones. That's the variation. If you gave the carbon refund to everybody just on a per kilowatt hour basis, everybody is the same, upstate or downstate. But you can target by zone who those carbon refunds go to, and then then there doesn't have to be any variation in the impact across zones. So that's just a policy question. Not going to go into these in detail, but for your enjoyment, our report goes into all these different uncertainty analyses. Some of the more prominent ones, so again, none of them qualitatively change the answer, but they do move it plus or minus $1 a megawatt hour or slightly more. And the biggest effects are how much entry of new resources do you get that then lowers energy and capacity prices? So I told you we assumed 700 megawatts of combined cycles. If that's more or less, you have a different impact. That's one of the bigger effects. Another big effect is gas prices. So if gas prices, and the reason is mostly because of ZECs. So if gas prices are high, ZEC prices are low, and there's really not much headroom for then reducing them and saving customers money by introducing a carbon charge. So those are two of the big variables. There's another one that we looked at, just kind of an extreme scenario, just to see what it would look like. What happens if the world looks very different? Upstate renewables are really bottled up there, and prices and marginal emission rates upstate go to very, very low, like near zero. Then what happens with a carbon charge? And even then, customer costs on average are not higher. They're actually lower. So happy to talk offline about more of these things we explored, and we're happy to explore more of these kinds of things, in later steps. But it was interesting. A lot of the things that we thought would have a bigger effect didn't, like small changes in the marginal emission rate. as we'll talk about in a minute, one of the big questions about how to design a mechanism like this is how you treat imports and exports at the border. So the very different way we looked at from our base case, not all that different in terms of customer cost impact. Some uncertainties on, actually one really surprising one is, remember we said that the most uncertain aspect is how much does the market respond to a carbon price in terms of new investment. Well, if you can see here, sorry for folks on the phone, I'm pointing to the carbon price-induced abatement on slide 21. It, whether it's half as much or twice as much, it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of customer costs. So basically, so that in terms of the impacts, that's what we found. I'm going to move on now to the last section on, shortish, on the market design questions. And then since nobody's interrupted me so far, I guess we're waiting till the end for questions, okay? Comments? Okay, so one big question is there'd be, I think it's $1.5 billion a year in the carbon fund. So what's done with that? When we're assuming it's returned to customers. And even if it is returned to customers, how would that be done? How is it allocated among, for example, load-serving entities? How would load-serving entities then pass it on to customers? These would be some big questions to address in later steps. So another big one is how to prevent leakage at the border. This is a really big deal, actually, but it's solvable. So what is leakage? If you put a substantial charge on internal resources, and we've got this transmission system, they're competing with external resources, you're just going to competitively disadvantage the internal resources. Imports will come flooding in, exports will cease, and it'll look like you reduced emissions internally, but you didn't. You just shipped them outside. And for CO2, that's not very attractive. In fact, you could even make emissions worse because you've distorted the dispatch away from the least cost producers. So it's really important to address this. And by the way, this is a big deal for Reggie too, which I'll talk about in a minute. The thing is, you can solve this problem, and it's by putting a charge on imports at the border and a credit on exports. So there are various approaches here to do that. And the key is, look, if somebody is in PJM, if say the price everywhere would be $50, but with the carbon price it goes up to 70 in New York, again, you'd expect power to just come flooding in. So one thing you can do is, instead of having somebody see, oh, I can buy power in PJM at 50 and sell it in New York at 70 and earn the 20, you just have to take the 20 away. And that's the simple way to do it. Simplest way to do it is if you just said, okay, we're just going to erase the effect of the carbon charge on pricing from neighbors or traders' perspectives. And you can do that. So for example, if you charge imports at the New York carbon price and charge them as if they have the same emissions as resources at the entry point in New York, you simply make the carbon charge invisible from their perspective. So you're not going to create any distortions from it. You're not going to have leakage. And it's the same with exports. If you say, okay, well, the price here is now 70, but in New England it's 50, who's going to send any power over there? You'll just stop exporting power, because why would you buy at 70 and sell at 50? But if you say, oh, sure, that marginal generator that costs 70, including the carbon charge, and put some money in the carbon fund, we're going to give that right back from the carbon fund, right back to whoever's exporting. So you'll basically see the New York power at 50, and now you're happy to export again. It just erases the carbon charge from the perspective of the trader. So you can do it. You can completely avoid leakage. That's the simple approach. There are more complicated. The problem with it, though, is, you know, as you can probably tell from the way I described it, it doesn't distinguish among neighbors, clean generating neighbors versus dirtier neighbors. It doesn't distinguish the emission rate of neighbors versus internal resources. It pretends they're all the same, but it does stop leakage. But you might want to do one better than that, to have the carbon charge help optimize over where you're getting all the most cost-effective, you know, get the most cost-effective mix of energy and carbon abatement from the region, and you know, find opportunities to import if that's a cost-effective way to reduce emissions, or to export if that's a cost-effective way. If you're reducing, because you're actually offsetting emissions in, say, New England, if you're sending power to New England. And so you can have more sophisticated approaches that take into account what is the marginal emission rate at play in the neighboring market, and also what is the carbon price, if any, in your neighboring market. So you can get a lot fancier with this. You know, if you all decide to go ahead with, or even just want to explore this idea further of doing carbon pricing, this is a major topic. You'll have to work through the details. So there are also interactions with other New York policies and processes, so DERs and REV. So one nice thing is putting a carbon charge, again, it gives all resources the same price signal with respect to providing energy and carbon abatement. And this could flow through to DERs as well. There would have to be some modifications to the way the compensation is done and the way benefit cost analyses are done, just to make sure you're not double counting. You can't put the carbon price in the energy price and then also count it as a societal cost in the value stack. You have to avoid double counting. So there's a couple modifications that need to be done here. Renewable energy credits. In the analysis that we did, we assumed that for every dollar that energy prices go up, that a Tier 1 resource gets, they would be willing to take $1 lower REC price. But the risk is not actually symmetric for them in getting a sure thing on the REC contract versus you know, a possible increase in the energy price. And so there are questions here. How do you want to price? How do you want to structure future RECs in the presence of a carbon pricing regime? So that the, is there some way that the suppliers can basically lock in the carbon value, not take the huge regulatory risk that maybe the future carbon price will change. Oh, I was banking on a high carbon price and a high associated energy price, so I gave you a low REC price. But then somehow the political will changes and the carbon price changes. So is there any way to contractually lock it in? So there are ways, and we talk about that in the report. By the way, the traditional way is just do a PPA instead of a REC contract, but that has a number of disadvantages. There's some sort of more advanced REC concepts that basically include a contract for differences on a carbon price that could be considered. So I'm just teeing up the topics here. There's a lot to discuss if you, you know, decide to go ahead exploring these ideas. Interactions with RGGI. So I don't think there are any significant interactions with RGGI. I don't think that having this mechanism would then somehow cause the RGGI price to go significantly up or down. The thing that might cause that to go way up or down is just a major change in state emissions. So I don't expect any major impact on RGGI. But there are a couple of really important points about RGGI that, to me, this study has highlighted. One is that RGGI itself has some leakage issues that have to be dealt with. So one is through leakage of allowances. If you're doing something if you're doing something in New York State that aims to reduce emissions a lot more than what's contemplated under RGGI, and you reduce emissions, but then keep selling your share of the allowances, auctioning your share of the allowances, you're liberating a lot of allowances, just somebody else pollutes. Now, fortunately, the current incarnation of RGGI is, I think, much more aligned with New York's goals, so maybe that risk is a lot lower. But the other But there's another risk of leakage with RGGI that I think's gotten sharper, gotten worse, which is, so with the more ambitious, with the faster declining caps, RGGI prices should be higher than they are now. And what does that mean? There's leakage through trading, just like we talked about a minute ago. And that's at the border of RGGI states and non-RGGI. So it's sort of Maryland to the rest of PJM, and it's New York to Pennsylvania. It becomes really important to plug that hole. And in fact, studies by RGGI show that leakage is quite significant. I don't know if, I think I recall something like a third of the emissions reductions would be offset by leakage to, just into PJM, if I have that right, and I think even worse at the margin. So it's really important to do some kind of border charge, like we discussed. Even if you don't do a carbon charge in New York on internal resources, you really want to consider some sort of border adjustment like we've talked about, so you don't have severe leakage, because New York is a lot of the RGGI boundary. Effect on decarbonization efforts in other sectors, worth mentioning here. And there was one of the comments or questions about this that we received. This is one of the things I was most worried about when we first got to this. The goals, as they should be, are economy-wide, not just the electric sector. So what happens if you put a price on electric carbon emissions, but not non-electric? Do you somehow distort interfuel competition? Do you discourage electrification, which is actually going to be an important part of meeting the climate goals? So that was one of the things I was really worried about when we started with this. What has really struck me is that since we found that the impact on customer costs, customer prices, because of all those offsetting effects, they would not be very high in the electric sector. I don't think this problem becomes not very big, right? Where if the carbon charges are returned to customers such that their total electric costs are not high, are not increasing, you don't expect leakage to other sectors. Or leakage in the economy of making an industrial facility less competitive than in other states. So I'm not saying the effect would be zero, but it becomes much less worrisome when you see the magnitude of the customer cost impact. And then other New York ISO processes, so the capacity market, I don't necessarily see a direct link or necessity to change anything in the capacity market if doing a carbon charge, other than a few things like how it might affect the value of net cone and the placement of the demand curve. I mean, anything that changes in the market can affect that, but nothing fundamental. Transmission planning, actually a really interesting, I think really important part of the idea of a carbon charge. We talked about all the things that the market might do to react to a carbon charge. But what about transmission planning? So the KERIS process looks at production cost savings. And I think one thing the state has to worry about with a very aggressive build-out of renewables is that upstate, which has attractive resources and lower costs, is going to get a lot of resources up there. The price and the marginal emission rates up there both are going to be falling. How much will they fall before it becomes really economic to build transmission or to add renewables downstate? And having a carbon charge would really help with both those things, give more reward to going downstate. It would also have more reward show up in the KERIS process for building transmission, say, across Central East. You would see a lot more benefit, economic benefit, and KERIS doesn't include sort of the societal benefit of the carbon externality. So putting it in the carbon price, you will see in the KERIS process the value of more transmission from upstate to downstate or across Central East. So I think, just to conclude here, we looked at carbon pricing as a straightforward and a few details to work out, but economically efficient way to harmonize the wholesale markets with the state decarbonization goals. We found that it would improve the economic efficiency of meeting both energy and environmental goals, and then And we found that customer costs would not rise materially. Although it is true that more of the economic gains, there would be economic gains, but more of those gains would flow to producers. But still, customer costs wouldn't rise a lot. And then, as I just mentioned, there are a number of areas for market design sort of discussion. None of them, I think, what I'd call showstoppers, like, oh, you'll never figure out how to do this well enough. They're all things that, there are decent solutions, but there are a lot of choices to make, and I tried to tee them up in the last couple slides. So that's it for what I wanted to share. I think there's a longer version and there is an appendix here that I'm not going to go through, but I think it's publicly available, posted somewhere. So we'll make sure that's available.
Thank you, Sam. Could we get the agenda put back up? I want to explain the rest of the day. Maybe not. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Rich and I are going to take a few minutes now and talk about the process going forward and next steps. What happens after today, how we're going to go about organizing our work and involving all of you here today and those that aren't, and what are some of the initial next steps that we want to launch between now and really end of November, beginning of December. After that, Rich, Sam, and I will be available for questions about both the report itself, and Sam will be able to answer any questions you want to probe into, and Rich and I will be able to answer any questions you may have as best we can about both process and the next steps. So to start that out, I want to invite Rich to share some thoughts.
Thanks, Scott. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rich Dewey, the Executive Vice President for the New York ISO. What we want to do is just kind of lay out what we foresee being the process going forward. There's a lot of information that's new to a lot of folks in this room, probably. It was very encouraging to look at the data and to see the analysis, but I think the one thing we want to make sure everybody understands is there's a lot of work left to do before we ever could get this to into a shape that it could be substantive, real, and be a proposal that we could act on. Again, as Brad described at the start, we looked at this as to explore whether there's an opportunity here for markets that have been very successful for what they were designed to do. Could these markets be adjusted to meet the new policy goals, which is essentially carbon reduction? And the analysis is promising, and we think it bears additional analysis. As Sam laid out, there's a lot of pieces of this that are not yet determined or decided. So there's a lot of work left to do, and we're going to need some help from all the stakeholders, not only the New York ISO market participants through the stakeholder process, but also stakeholders in general that have ideas, and we want to solicit that and make sure we provide a forum that we can explore all of that. As Sam indicated, the study itself was very well thought out, but it was based on a whole lot of assumptions that folks in this room and listening on the phone might want to challenge or prod or question, and we need to provide a forum that we can do that so we can very thoroughly understand what assumptions were behind some of these studies and what the construct of this concept entails. And then we need to really flesh out and dig into those pieces that are not yet very well defined, and that's going to take some time, and we're going to dive right in on the New York ISO market participant process to provide that opportunity, and Scott's going to talk about how we can solicit ideas and proposals from a broader stakeholder community as well. The other piece that we also need to consider is there's work underway looking at the existing wholesale markets. This is one way that we can incorporate market economics to help solve the policy objectives, but the reality is there's a lot more renewables coming onto our system, so we need to look at what changes might be necessitated in our existing market products and our existing, whether it's capacity markets, energy markets, or ancillary services, to be able to accommodate that grid of the future. So those conversations will be continuing through our stakeholder process as well. And we look forward to everybody who's got some ideas to bring them forward and just provide the right kind of framework and the right kind of opportunity that we can do that, and we can as thoroughly vet it as possible and continue to make regular, steady progress towards what we hope is the most efficient way, the most efficient mechanism to achieve these policy goals for the electric sector as we move into the next decade.
Thank you. We want to thank everybody who sent in questions or suggestions, both questions about the Brattle report itself or questions that you had about process going forward. We'll be touching upon some of those now, but we encourage you again to raise them during the question and answer, either for questions directed to Sam or to Rich and I. Among the questions that were frequently asked was, okay, so how do we go forward from here? What process are you going to use? And I want to suggest two sort of fundamental centering points. One is that the staff teams from both the NYISO, DPS, and NYSERDA, the state team and the NYISO team, have begun to form the collegial staff team that will carry this work forward to getting to a proposal, as Rich mentioned. And the idea of developing a proposal is really at the heart of how we're looking at the process. We anticipate that there will come a day when a proposal will in fact exist, and when that happens, that proposal, in whatever form it takes, with all the issues it has, will be subject to the very formal and well-established and critical processes, both in terms of NYISO governance and passing it through that process, as well as whatever might be appropriate in terms of PSC and DPS processes. But what we want to do leading up to that is very collaboratively work together with everybody in this room to be able to enable that joint staff team to develop interim straw proposals, to do some analysis, provide fodder for the discussion, and eventually present a proposal. And while all that work is taking place, again, through that joint staff team, we not only anticipate, we encourage this discussion to take place in multiple forums, starting with the NYISO market participant committee process. We envision that there will be discussions there. We want discussions to be there to help inform this process. We envision that NGOs, trade associations, law schools, environmental schools, everybody can think of, may want to host discussions, events, papers, all of which will be informational. We look forward to it, we encourage it, and we have set up processes both at DPS and the NYISO so that information can be filed and be publicly accessible and shared. And we also encourage you, as we announce in the next week or so, the leads of the staff team, that you reach out to them so that they can be available, or members of the team can be available to also participate in the discussion. We know that there's a lot of questions of, okay, so how long is this going to take? Will I live long enough in order to see the outcome of this process? And the honest answer is we don't know. Brad, in prior remarks, has talked about 3 years. Sounds okay from today, I guess, to eventual ready for implementation. But what Rich and I have committed to each other and now to you is both to be honest and say, today we don't know, but in January we'll be able to begin to lay out a real time frame, and that time frame will be able to be informed by all the discussions we'll be having collectively between now and then. We want to do something realistic, and the realistic answer is today we don't know, but this is not meant to be an academic exercise. This is meant to result in something tangible. In terms of the precise next steps, we want to present two. The details around what I'm about to say now will be presented in the form of notices over the course of the next 10 days or so. But the first is we want to invite, we encourage, we solicit, we will do everything including beg you, if you have ideas, if you have alternative frameworks to what Sam has presented, either in terms of pricing carbon into the wholesale energy market, or if you want to say, gee, we think you're looking at this entirely the wrong way, we're going to invite you to submit your own frameworks, to supplement the materials that the Brattle report represents. Many of you have heard us say over the past few weeks that the Brattle report is a resource for us. It's not the platform from which we're building off of. And we want to build a very robust and deep resource pool. So you're going to be invited to do that. And we encourage you to do that. And we even encourage you, not only even, we in fact encourage you to work collaboratively and to submit these materials both for the benefit of the Joint Staff Team as well as for each other. As I said, we'll be sending out some information about that in the next 7 or 10 days, and we're envisioning a requested deadline of on or about November 1st to be able to get that in so we can have some use of it. The second thing we want to announce is the first and what will undoubtedly be a series of technical conferences. We envision this as a full-day event. The exact venue is yet to be determined and the exact format is yet to be determined, but we have zeroed in on 2 topics, both of which were touched on by Sam today. One is the issue of borders and seams, and we're envisioning having a very robust discussion about that, inviting people in from around the country who have thought about this issue and have wrestled with it and lived with it. We're still working on format, but we intend to be much more conversational than just a talking head. The second topic, which we want to begin to get to, is revenue allocation. And really begin to think about how should we even begin to approach this issue? What are the criteria that we should be establishing collectively? How do we determine how to even to begin to analyze this issue? Again, that will be done during the second half of the day, and we envision that to be very conversational. More details about these the technical conference, the topics, and how you can participate will be forthcoming in the next week or so. We envision that happening possibly either right before or right after Thanksgiving. And we think those 2 activities, preparing for them and also initiating the kind of multi-forum discussions I alluded to, will keep us all very busy between now and the end of the calendar year. Rich?
What we want to do now is we want to open up and provide an opportunity for questions. What we'd like to do is there's a microphone in the aisle there, and we'd like anybody that's interested in a question, ask a question either of myself or Scott or Sam, to use that microphone, and just please state your name and your organization or affiliation, and we'll do the best we can to respond and answer to any questions you might have.
I'm assuming that Sam's going to get the bulk of the questions, so I'm going to bring chairs up so Rich and I can sit. But Sam, why don't you come up and join us? We'll have some chairs in case it goes long. Just line up and ask that everybody be respectful of everybody's interest. Please limit your questions to a question, first round, and please limit it to a couple minutes and save the statements.
Hi, my name is Mark Dudley, and I'm with Community Education. I'm legal fund. I was glad to hear that you're going to do a session around the issue of revenues, because this is largely what is known as a 100% dividend proposal. And in the state of Washington, when this issue came up recently, that was voted down a lot because of objections from the unions and the environmental justice community. And that's sort of my question. You did spend a little time talking about why you weren't doing the carbon tax. You mainly talked about the issue of the political difficulty of passing a tax. But given that a carbon tax tends to go across all sectors, rather than just the electric production, which is about 25% or so of carbon emissions, what do you see as advantage of this type of carbon pricing, just electricity, versus a broader carbon?
Yes. So first, I'll acknowledge that in the analysis and the study that we asked Brattle to do, we did not substantively address the revenue allocation. It was more of a cost-benefit analysis to determine what the overall opportunities to implement a market-based approach at a reasonable cost. It is a very sticky issue that is going to require a lot of dialogue and a lot of conversation. I think that I'll take a first crack at it, and then Scott can jump in. The thought around providing the carbon charge in a manner with which this study and this framework looked at it was a better opportunity to get the costs reflected back to the customers that were actually paying for the service most directly. And again, there's a lot of details and specifics that would need to be worked out for exactly how that needs to be done, and it was consciously not substantively addressed in this analysis, just recognizing that there were so many different interests that were going to need to be heard before we resolve that.
First, I want to acknowledge Commissioner Berman from the PSC is here, and I want to thank her for her engagement on this issue. This is an issue. You'll see a lot of staff, but the commissioners are very actively engaged in thinking about this issue, and Commissioner Berman's presence is just an example of that. At the risk of being very transparent, skirting the question, let me say that as we at DPS began to approach this, as Commissioner Rhodes noted, we were off doing a lot of work in the area of the CES and ZECs and other issues in advancing the state's decarbonization goals. And the NYISO began to do its work, looking at the markets that it administers and what role it can play. And those of you who have a scorecard and are following this know that on the May 1st technical conference that was held in Washington by FERC, we began, particularly those of us from New York, to talk about the issue of harmonization. And that was a direct result of some discussions that were taking place in the late March, early April time period, when we realized that for New York and for ourselves, we need to think about how do we tackle this question together, and how do we do it as a question and not two separate processes. That's what really led to this. The Brattle work was already underway, so we engaged both with Sam and his team as well as with Rich and his team to begin to understand the assumptions, and said the question at hand is how can the wholesale energy market be harmonized with state policy to achieve state policy goals? It's a very specific question. From some of the questions you all submitted, we expect that there will be some related issues that will be tackled, but this all was an evolving response to a very, in my mind, very specific question on how do you harmonize and can you harmonize these two things. I'll expose my prejudice. I believe they can be harmonized. The question is, how do we do that? The report that Sam authored presents an approach, but not necessarily the final approach, and that's what we need to work on together.
Thank you. I'm Manna Jo Green. I'm the Environmental Director for Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, and I moonlight as an Ulster County legislator where I chair the Climate Smart Committee. I have one comment and then a couple of suggestions for the two areas of focus. I am very, very pleased with the overview today, and I think New York is headed in a good direction. I want to qualify that by saying I thought that was true with REV as well. And then the clean energy standards were passed, and as many people know, Clearwater has some concerns about ZECs and the nuclear subsidy. But I implore you not to use the word clean when talking about renewable energy. I ask you to think about the communities who had the benefit of the goose that laid the golden egg for so many years and are now faced with massive amounts of high-level radioactive waste that will be in their community and for which they are not being compensated. I think, you know, refer to nuclear as nuclear. If you have to call it zero emission, call it zero emission at the point of, because there are emissions in the life cycle, et cetera. Please reconsider that terminology. I also think that considering the borders is a really important question. I understand how charging for imports will help make the system work. I don't understand how discounting exports, because it seems to me that would encourage dirty generation to be exported. So that, I think, is an important question. And then lastly, in terms of revenue allocation, I think we need to think about low and moderate income families. I think that's an important area to focus on. And also reinvesting the funds in accelerating renewable energy and energy efficiency and demand response and everything that will get us to a renewable energy economy. Thank you.
Sam, do you want to respond all to the question on borders?
Sure. Yeah, the concept of an export credit is not very widely recognized. So I think we've introduced that topic here. I haven't seen it talked about a lot of other places, but I think it is just as important as the import charge. It's just the mirror image. If you don't have it, you will just not have any exports, and that means that somebody else is having to generate more. And the problem is, first of all, that just distorts the accounting. It looks as if you've reduced emissions, and you haven't. The other is that I think you can understand it by example. I mean, imagine if what's at the margin in New York, it's largely gas-fired. Imagine it's a combined cycle. But all of a sudden you raise its cost from, say, $30 per megawatt hour to close to $50 a megawatt hour. And now imagine there's a coal plant in PJM that would otherwise not be running, and its dispatch cost is $40 a megawatt hour. If you put on the carbon charge here but no export credit, and you make it look like a $50 unit, you will turn it off and run the $40 coal unit in PJM instead. And that would not only, that would actually increase emissions. And the only way to actually get it right, well, sure, because if you're reducing emissions in New York of the combined cycle, but you're increasing generation and emissions in PJM, and the total amount of CO2 that's added to the stock in the atmosphere is positive. You've actually increased that. And if you you really need the export credit, and actually theoretically the right way to do it is to recognize, whenever you generate a little more inside New York, somebody outside can generate a little bit less, and you have to recognize that. You have to recognize you can imagine crediting them as you export. Sure, you are charged for the emissions. But then you're at the same time getting credited for reducing emissions at whatever the emissions rate is in the neighboring market. I mean, that would be theoretically the most efficient way to do it. But having no export credit would create just as big a problem as having no import charge.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jay Brew for Nucor Steel Auburn. This is sort of a foundational question. I appreciate there are lots of questions about the assumptions, but Scott, you mentioned the FERC technical conference earlier this year. Most of the discussion on this topic so far has been market pricing versus mandates. Sam, your report is market pricing plus mandates. Is that an implicit assumption going in? The cost of your adder, $19 times the estimated usage, is $3 billion a year to the New York economy, on top of the state mandates. So was there an assumption that this is a cheaper way of achieving those reductions than looking at other sectors, or was that just the parameters of the study you were given to look at?
I guess I don't understand the question exactly. Can you rephrase that?
Sure. The debate at FERC had been, which path should we choose? Should we preempt the states? Should we accommodate the states in pricing?
Sure, no, I get that.
And your report was, we'll take the state mandates and we'll add a carbon price. So instead of it's markets versus mandates, you're doing both. Was that how the scope of the study was defined, or are you assuming that that would lead to a cheaper carbon abatement?
No, I don't want to take it. I just want to reframe it a little bit, or at least share a slightly different perspective, and then get to the heart of your question, Jay. At least to my ears, when I participated in that conference and spoke at it, there was asserted by some this bifurcated choice, where either you had to do mandates or you did markets. And what we tried to say was, no, that's not the case, and it's not an issue of accommodating, and it truly is an issue of harmonization. And I'll leave it to Rich, but my understanding of the work that was launched by the NYISO about a year ago was to take the assumption, not because it was going to be necessarily additive, but there would be harmonizing, saying, can the markets, the wholesale energy markets, exist and operate alongside of state policy? Or do we have to make a choice? And at least to my subjective eyes, admittedly, I hear the beginning of an approach that says, as revenues increase in the market, in the energy market, that should have a downward effect on both ZEC costs as well as REC costs. And it's an illustration of a way these two approaches can work in harmony with one another. Now, what we have to test is that realistic? And I think it's safe to say that there's nobody who would support saying, let's just be additive. To paraphrase Senator Dirksen, penny here, a penny there, and all of a sudden you've got real money. So I don't see this as by definition being financially additive. It's rather harmonizing of approaches, but the proof will be in the analysis as to whether or not that approach, which I understand what the Brown report has done, is as feasible as it might seem.
Yeah, I think that we took it as a given that the mandate is the policy. The policy is we're going to get 50% of our power generation resources or power generation needs from renewable resources. Now, what's the best way to accomplish that? We did not challenge that, and I know from some of your earlier comments you're questioning whether on an economy-wide basis or an environmental-wide basis is that the right approach. We took that as the given, and then we asked Brattle to then look at, given the tools that the state has with the clean energy standard, is there a way that the markets could complement that and either get a more efficient solution at the same or a better price, or provide a different set of tools or an additional set of tools? And Scott came up with the word harmonize, and that's how we've looked at it. Is there a way that these can work together to achieve that goal and that mandate? But we did not challenge whether the mandate was the right mandate to accomplish the goal. That was that's what we were given as our task, and that's what we're working towards.
Okay, but just really quick follow up. If you're doing the market pricing in addition to the state mandates, were you assuming, did you look at any other alternative ways of doing that? Looking at the other, did you look at any other sector of the New York economy other than the electric markets? Is that right?
Well, I think I see those as different questions. I mean, the cross-sectoral questions versus mandates or not. And we did not look at other sectors. And we also did not look at a case where there's no clean energy standard. But we did find that at the carbon price that we were looking at, that the ZEC price would go to zero, and that the REC price would go lower. So in that way, they're sort of more on a continuum of more of one versus more of one, less of another.
We can talk about the consistency of your assumptions a lot, because there's a lot to discuss there. But my point is simply, if you're assuming greater electrification in the economy, How are you doing that by raising prices?
Meaning, how do you encourage electrification if you're raising prices?
Yes.
Well, our conclusion, don't forget, is that the customer costs of electricity would not be rising a lot. Now, it's not necessarily zero. They might be going down slightly, depending on our assumption, right? Because you saw that it's a range from negative to slightly positive, but it's not like it's the red bar. I mean, most of that is offset by other factors, and so.
Only if those assumptions for the offsets are reasonable.
Yeah, things like that the carbon charges are returned to customers is the biggest one. Right.
Hi, Matthew Schwal, Independent Power Producers of New York. I have a few questions, but I'm just going to lead off with what I think is one of the more interesting and critical ones. And
speak more to the mic?
it actually, this question builds off the topic that was just raised. It has to do with FERC's technical conference on May 1st, which I think really kicked off this whole process. One of the issues that FERC was very concerned about, I believe, was price formation. It's part of this that Sam touched on briefly. I think it's very critical. FERC's looking for guidance. They gave a number of paths forward. They wanted guidance on how they should rule, what they should do. I think that it's critical for the NYISO to continue down its stakeholder process to develop some sort of conceptual rule in order to give FERC guidance. So my question is, would it be possible for the NYISO to work through its stakeholder process to come up with a conceptual filing to submit to FERC prior to any tariff language, prior to coming to a complete market design, in order to get some guidance from FERC? So I think that's what they're looking for. They're looking for something to rule on. Or does it make sense?
I'll go first. One of the things we heard from FERC is that in order to be successful, any proposal that we would bring to the FERC would require a great deal, very high percentage of stakeholder support across the entire set of stakeholders. And what we want to make sure that we do to meet that bar is to have the most thoroughly vetted conversation and design to get to that point. So when we do go down to FERC, and we hope we do, and with the help of everyone in this room, we think we can get there. But when we do go down to FERC, we've got a very, very solid proposal that's endorsed by a very high percentage of the stakeholders. So to get to that, there's going to be some very thorough vetting of some of these contentious issues, and we don't want to act too hastily and then invite contention down in the FERC forum by somebody who doesn't feel like we've thoroughly vetted that out. So that's part of the reason why, as we stand here today, we can't tell you the date by which we think we're going to be done. We're going to work very hard to come up with a schedule of what things we need to get worked out and when we think we can get it done. But we don't want to prematurely put this down at the federal level and then get it derailed because we haven't thoroughly vetted that out and have the right kind of stakeholder support.
Yeah, I want to make 2 points. First, importantly, nobody should assume that FERC is not aware of what we are doing here today and going forward. At the DPS staff level as well as the NYISO staff level, there are ongoing conversations. There have been, they're going to continue with FERC staff. So they're well aware of this process, and to be fair, I don't think it's unfair to say they're very encouraged by it and by the collaborative nature of it. The second thing is that, like you, I was there. I engaged in the dialogue with former Chairman Flirt, former chair, and the construct of whether it was the 3 paths or the 5 doors and all that different discussion, she admitted was artificial. And that if in fact there's going to be a solution, whether it be a path in New York or a path in PJM or in New England, it's going to require some element of each of those 3 paths or each of those 5 doors. There's going to be some continued legal skirmishing. There's going to be collaboration. There's going to be all those elements. So I urge all of us to walk away from artificial paradigms of choices and begin to see how do we solve this problem and really get a system that's harmonized and advances the goals that we share.
Okay, I would just add that timing is obviously going to be critical. So in January, when we come out with the timeline, there really needs to be, milestones for achievement so we can get back to FERC as soon as possible. Just one more question. This one has to do with...
Can I ask you to let somebody else, and you can always come back?
Oh, I didn't realize the line had grown so much.
Okay.
Hello, Keith Shue with Otsego 2000, based in Cooperstown. As I was here listening to this, I have to ask myself, what is the added value that's being suggested here? And I think that goes back to a question that a person questioning a couple people behind me, before me, had asked as well. When I look at this proposal, basically I'm seeing, okay, it's creating an alternative mechanism to promote renewables. Okay, that's good. The Rex did that also. It's also creating a way to keep the nuclear plants alive for another 10 years or so. Okay, well, the ZECs did that. The only really tangible difference in terms of value, potential value being added, I'm seeing, is that this is causing the construction of more combined cycle gas-fired power plants as opposed to not combined cycle power plants that exist today. But that presumes that it's a really good idea to be investing more in fossil fuels that are going to be with us for decades. A lot of people have some very serious concerns about that. Do we need more combined cycle gas-fired power plants, or do we need just more renewables? I think that's the real question. And when I look at the overall approach here, I see that this program is being suggested for only the electricity sector. And I appreciate the analysis that's been done, and I appreciate that the analysis has determined that there won't be leakage necessarily from the electricity sector to other sectors of transportation and heating and so forth. I appreciate that. But the real question is, what are we going to do about those other sectors? What are we actually going to do about those other sectors of heating and transportation so that they can become electrified? I don't see anything in this proposal that incentivizes that in any way. If you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Actually, well, let Scott talk about the other sectors, because there are other policies that are just not part of this proposal. There was a question you had before that, though, that I wanted to get to. And I think when you mentioned combined cycle, so first of all, that was not the only market response that we considered, right? I mean, there was also sharper, more granular price signals for investment in new renewables, where they're located, that is not incentivized by the current REC structure. There was also, depending on the sort of rate structure about how carbon charges are returned, volumetric versus other approaches, there may be an incentive to use less energy, fewer kilowatt hours. There are better incentives for storage and other things that the market might do, depending on how you charge at the border, maybe for cleaner imports. There are a lot of effects. I mean, there are a lot of ways in which the market... Now, one that is an important effect in some other markets, if you did a carbon price, like in the Midwest, would be a lot of coal to gas switching, and that does not really exist here, that opportunity. But there are others. I'd like to address next your concern about building combined cycles. I mean, there's nothing about this that's a pro-combined cycle policy. It's just that it recognizes if one resource is cleaner than another, it can extract a little more value. Now, whether it's a good idea to invest, the investors can decide that based on, well, maybe in the short term, they're reducing emissions and there's a lot of value there, but eventually in the long term, when you've gotten rid of all the dirtier generators and there's not a lot of reward, you're actually the dirtiest, and maybe clean resources are in the money and some combination of them and storage, and now the economics aren't so good for you, 15 years down the road. I mean, the investors can decide whether it's a good deal overall and actually the prices are providing an accurate signal of what value they're providing. They can decide whether that's a good investment or not, given a long run that's going towards deeper decarbonization. And just to be clear, in our analysis, we assumed, even though people are building combined cycles today, a 1/3 chance that market response is just irrelevant. It wouldn't happen, that people would not be building combined cycles. So when we said 700 megawatt, our analysis actually showed 50% more than that. But one of our assumptions was that, don't expect that for sure, because, it may not, investors may find that doesn't make sense in the long run. So I just wanted to be clear that we thought about that, and but most of all, that just because that was one of the effects that we imagined, and there are other market responses as well, just because that was one of the ones that we imagined, it would be a mistake to view this as a sort of pro-fossil policy. It really isn't.
I'm just trying to understand what the net differences are, and when I looked at the the stacked bar graph, it looked like that was basically most of it, frankly. But the question I want to ask is, how can this conversation be expanded so that you are actually addressing the other big sectors, the other three quarters?
Sure. So let me begin to address that. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, I want to introduce you to the State Energy Plan, which provides the state's view on policies and initiatives that are being undertaken in each of the sectors to achieve the decarbonization goals. So that's, I'm going to suggest, the starting point. Second point I want to make is that this discussion today, the question which Sam and his colleagues and to tackle the discussion at FERC, is in some ways is very specific, and it is, what role does the wholesale energy markets have in advancing state goals? Can they be harmonized as the way we discuss it in New York, or are these two sets of initiatives that are going to operate in tension and in parallel? We collectively think there's a way to harness all the value of the wholesale energy markets and to help contribute to the goal, not necessarily to achieve it all. Undoubtedly, as we go through this analysis, the questions you raise are going to be discussed in some detail, which is, as we look at the electric sector and what burden in terms of accomplishment we're placing either on the wholesale energy markets or on administrative mandates through the PSC, are they weighted too much to that sector? Are they falling too heavily on certain aspects of the sectors of the economy as opposed to others? If we have a goal for beneficial electrification, as Jay mentioned, what does this do to these are all questions that we expect to be tackling. But this issue was launched, this study was launched to say, how do you take the wholesale energy markets and all that it can do and all it can provide to the economy and the state's regulatory scheme and bring them together in some harmonized way? But we can't talk about that with touching upon the broader issues. And again, I think the starting point of that is the State Energy Plan.
Hi, Stuart Nachmias from Con Edison. Just want to first say thanks for all the work, Sam, with the Brattle Group, and for the presentation today and the start of what will be a process, and Rich and Scott to helping us kick off that process, and we look very much forward to participating in that. My question or comment is with respect to I guess, Sam, when you started, you were talking about reliability and how the markets have really worked well in terms of meeting the reliability needs of the customers of the state, but haven't yet incorporated the environmental clean energy goals, which Con Edison is fully supportive of. So we're interested in working further. One of the ways, so reliability I think is going to be really important as we go through the process to make sure that we're considering how we're continuing to meet reliability requirements. One of the ways we've done that through the markets is through the capacity markets. And Sam, on I guess one of your last slides, you did note that there is an interrelationship with the energy markets and capacity markets. Every few years we spend an agonizing amount of time on the cost of new entry and what are the energy market offsets, and you know, how the energy market price and what price we would use. Is it the higher price with the carbon adder? Is it the net of what is actually customers are paying? How does that impact the capacity market? And importantly, how does that impact the resources that we need for reliability to manage a variable future? Just want to highlight, I think that's going to be an important area for us to really delve in. I'm not sure, maybe you could just comment how much you delved in on that particular issue, but that's all I wanted to raise as being important for us.
Okay, well, thanks for your questions and comments, Stuart. So we didn't delve into it really in the report. I'm happy to respond briefly, especially because I agree this is a topic to discuss further. So as for the capacity markets, you still have the same resource adequacy objectives, right? And you need the prices there to be sufficient to attract and retain enough resources to meet that objective, right? And so the parameters like net cone do have to account for, basically what is the missing money, what is the net cost of capacity for whatever you think the reference resource is. And that the numbers might change a little bit. Yeah, you would have to account for if they're earning some net energy revenues because they're a little more efficient than who's at the margin sometimes. That would slightly lower net cone, all else being equal.
Yeah, okay.
But that's just with that's the direct effect on the capacity market. I think there's a broader set of reliability and system security issues that maybe perhaps you were touching on as well as you go towards a very different kind of fleet with a lot more variable resources that don't have all the same inertia and dispatchability and flexibility and as traditional generators, and the net load is changing more quickly. So then the question is, how do you attract and retain enough of the flexibility type attributes that you need to maintain reliability and system security? And I think that's a question that New York ISO is addressing. I actually think all the ISOs that are going towards high renewable penetration need to think about that, because some of the attributes that we may have always gotten for free, along with other just the traditional generators have as sort of a side product, may now be becoming more scarce. And so you might need different ancillary services, you might need different ways of doing your energy price formation and for example ramp constraints. So I think we're both just teeing that up. I mean, this is a really important topic, but it's more something that springs from the CES than it does from a carbon charge. It springs more from having high renewables, however they're paid, than it does from having a carbon charge. Now, it may be that a carbon charge will help because it'll have, right, prices are very different. Instead of being often depressed to negative, they'll price formation will be different when you have a carbon charge. So maybe that'll help, but we haven't thought through that really.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is going to depend. It just shows the complexity, right? What are the resources you need? How are these markets changing? What are the revenues to what resources and the viability? I don't think we need to get into any of that now here, but there's, maybe you want to say there's going to be a lot of time to discuss these issues.
Yeah, and I thank you for bringing it up. I think we can't look at any one of these concepts in a vacuum, and it really requires a very thorough vetting of the interactions between all the different products, whether it's new products we might need to accommodate some of the intermittency, or whether it's changes to some of our existing products with the introduction of a new construct, and we need to really thoroughly flesh that out, and we agree with you.
Thank you. That's all I wanted. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Jessica Aguilé with Alliance for a Green Economy. I just have a question and then maybe suggestion for process. And first, I just want to echo my friend Mana's request not to call nuclear clean, because it's not. Uranium mining, radioactive emissions, etc. So I had a couple of questions really specifically on the section on the impact of the carbon charge on ZEC prices that I sent in via email, and I actually don't think this is the greatest forum to get them answered because they're kind of nitty-gritty, and I'm wondering if there's a process to submit questions in writing about the report in the lead up to this to get questions like that answered.
Yeah, I think we can commit to doing that. If you want to submit questions, I don't know exactly what the right address is. I know that through the New York ISO market participant process, there's a stakeholder services mailbox that you can expect a response back from. I suspect there's probably a similar process that Scott and I can just share them to make sure that people that have very specific questions, we can make sure they get answered.
Okay, great. And then just a suggestion for another area of inquiry and focus. And you did mention this in the report. So this talks about a carbon charge. And there are other greenhouse gases that come from our electricity sector. We use a lot of gas in New York, so there's methane emissions upstream. And so I think it would be really important for us to think about greenhouse gases as a whole and consider whether we can include a methane charge or charges for other greenhouse gases in this. This gets a little bit to Keith's point where we might be incentivizing more gas, but if gas is responsible for a lot of methane emissions and has a huge impact on the climate and we're just switching fossil fuels, we may not actually be improving our climate. So I think it's important for us to consider as part of this process.
Hi, Kelly Joseph with NRG. We also submitted a handful of questions, so I won't get into all of the details here, but I just want to raise a couple, and maybe this is something to take back, and we can talk about it further later. But the first is that the report focused on additional carbon abatement strategies and certainly highlighted that with pricing carbon, you would get additional carbon abatement in New York, possibly beyond what the state is looking for. But one of the challenges, I think, is that there's so many different goals that the state is looking to achieve, right? We've been talking about the Clean Energy Standard and the focus on RECs and ZECs, but we also have REV. There's a lot of effort in the state, various energy policy goals. And the $40 price, I guess, the question is that sufficient to not only handle ZECs, but get 50% renewables and achieve whatever the REV goals are? That's one question. And then related to that, the $40 price, there's a lot of conversion factors that go into that. And a big one is recognizing that the carbon intensity of the system is going to change over time. And I think what you used in the report is the number that the state used in the initial Clean Energy Standard, which was based on a 2012 system. So thinking about how that changes over time and what that carbon price actually is, and if it's sufficient to, again, handle the ZECs, bring on 50% renewables, and the state's REV goals. So I don't know if you want to answer these questions now or this is something to take back, but we had another whole list of questions, but I think those are the big ones.
I think it's a great question. We chose that number just to try to ground this analysis with some of the other cost analysis which had already been done to provide the best basis for comparison. There's probably a whole forum similar to this and additional discussion to debate what the right number is. And we didn't put a whole lot of analysis into it for the basis of this assessment because we just wanted to provide the most tight linkage for comparison purposes. But you're right, it's probably something that we're going to require additional discussion.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Philip Kahn from Citizens Climate Lobby. And it's sort of a related question to the last one, but I'd pose it for Sam in particular since you did all these sensitivity studies. When you came up with this very small net cost to end users using the price pegged to the social cost of carbon, did you consider just upping that price to see how rapidly the cost changed? Or if you haven't looked at that?
No, we did. We did another case with $60 charge and with a $20 charge, and I don't have it at my fingertips, but it is in the report.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Hi, Mark Younger, Hudson Energy Economics. Let me start by saying I thought it was a really good report. There's been a little pushback about you not addressing other sectors and any number of things, but I think you did a good job of addressing the question that was put before you, at least as I understand the question. First thing, it's a short line behind me. First thing, I think you sort of undersell one of the benefits of what you're talking about. You address the fact that you would provide more efficient investment signals for the renewables. being in the right place. But I think one of the things that putting carbon in the market does is it puts the focus back on a desire to decarbonize and away from necessarily just a desire to invest in renewable generation. You could put a lot of renewable generation, for instance, out west, where it may not provide that great a decarbonization effect. A short-sighted view might say, oh, we're meeting the CES goals, but we're certainly not meeting the larger objectives that were the basis for providing the CES goals. And by putting the carbon in the market, you'll provide a signal of how much carbon is really being displaced if you put a resource in a particular location with a particular generation profile versus maybe a more expensive resource in Southeast New York that does better at displacing carbon. Maybe on net, what you have to pay to get the better carbon displacing resource in the Southeast is less. And by putting carbon in the market, you get there. So that's one thing. I also think you undersold the expected offsets in a couple areas. One, I believe I am correct that you did not account in any way for the fact that NYIPA, which has a lot of green resources, also sells a fair amount of generation at market prices. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mark, you're right. Yes.
Okay. And so this is a source of revenue, certainly to the state, that could either be used to reduce taxes or it could be rebated to people, but that's not included anywhere in your estimate of savings to the market. That offsets against this $19 a megawatt hour cost, right?
Yeah. Yes, you're right.
Okay. And I think you acknowledged it, but there's been some discussion of REV. There are, for people who, I guess going forward, as we get rid of net metering, we end up with the stack, I think is what it's called. And part of the stack is a credit for CO2 savings. And obviously, the more the market represents the CO2 savings, the less you have to essentially subsidize this behind the meter stuff. And that would be another savings, because that would bring a out-of-market payment more directly into the market, and that's not captured anywhere, right?
Yep, good point.
Okay, thanks.
I am David Clark from Power Supply Long Island. My question is really about the marginal collections for the costs for carbon. You had mentioned that the average collection was about $1.5 billion. And you also mentioned that the average emission is about half of what the marginal emission is. Jay intimated that the total cost collection was about $3 billion. I think there's a little bit of confusion on that. Can you confirm that first? And then I have a question about what happens as you shift to collections for, from a marginal cost basis, on an LVMP basis, and out of collections that are collected currently on a REC basis, and how that addresses, how that changes kind of the regional cost allocation. So that's,
on the first one, I need to think for a second, and right, because you're saying, was it 1.5 or 3 billion? And I can't do it on the spot, but I'll come back in just a minute and answer that. Okay. I'm not sure I understood the second question though. About, can you elaborate a little bit more, or
yeah,
say
sure.
it again?
So right now, everyone across the board has has a kind of a pro rata share of the REC requirements. We have LIPA, for example, takes on, or Long Island takes on, a proportional share of those renewable energy requirements. And we pay for them, either through bilateral contracts, or we pay through them, through, if you don't have a contract, you pay through an alternate payment mechanism.
Oh,
but it's mostly a pro rata basis.
Right.
Those collections are going down, right, because the cost of the RECs are going down.
Right.
But the collections from locationally based marginal prices are going up because you're including carbon.
Yeah.
those effects are not moving in the same proportion, and they have different effects for downstate and for upstate. I guess that's my major point on that.
Yeah, I agree. And we actually estimate that in the report, and I can show you later where that is. But the other thing is that suggests that maybe you'd want to consider one of the aspects of, the sort of carbon revenue allocation is, do you give it out evenly, right? Or do you give it, to make up for the not proportional impacts that you just described?
But you're talking about giving back half of it, not giving back
No. That's a different point. So the total carbon fund would be given back to customers, and then it's a question of how. And the carbon fund, and I did just think about it as we were talking. So it is about $1.5 billion. I mean, think about it this way. So the total wholesale cost would, if it goes up about $20 a megawatt hour times about 150 terawatt hours, that's about $3 billion in total wholesale costs. And then the carbon fund is about half of that.
Okay.
So it's about $1.5 billion.
So the carbon fund is half of what you collect from load as returns.
Yes.
So there's still a disproportional impact for the other half, is, I guess, my point.
Right. The incidence of who's seeing prices increase more or less, that is not even. And that is where, that is for that reason that you might want to consider. Is that your point?
My point is that I think you're changing who's paying for the renewable energy, who's paying for the RECs behind the renewable energy.
I mean, it's a very good point, and it absolutely can have the effect of change or instigate change, which is one of the things we all have to collectively look at. And it's one of the things we'll begin to explore on the topic of revenue allocation. How do you divide it up, and how do you do it? And is there a way to reconcile these competing interests? Of course, the status quo is the status quo, but maybe that's not the best way either. So your point is well taken, and it frames one of the issues we're all going to have to work through.
Yeah, just a regional kind of change in the allocation of costs for RECs.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Suzanne DeRoche from the City of New York. I wanted you to talk a little bit about your assumptions around transmission. So when we talk about the locational benefits of low carbon power, were you assuming that those low carbon power sources would be built in Southeast New York, for instance, or were you assuming that there would be additional transmission that would be built to bring those low carbon sources to New York City?
So our guide for how much new renewable generation would be added and where and what types came from DPS's study that accompanied the Clean Energy Standard. And it was a mix. A lot of it was upstate, but some of it was in Southeast New York. So that was a mix. We didn't explicitly assume anything about transmission.
Hello.
Susan, that was a great point, Susan. We recognize that complementary to this is all of the activities and the work that we're working very aggressively on for public policy transmission, the need to build transmission facilities to enable the addition of a lot of these new renewables in the north and in the west and get that power down to the load centers. One of the things which, somebody asked earlier, what is one of the key benefits of this? Key benefit that we see is the locational nature of the price signal, so that the renewables will locate closer to the load centers. Absent that, we are going to need to continue to work to build transmission to be able to move that renewable power from the north and the west down to the southeastern part of New York for sure. It's a very important component of the overall picture, and we can't lose sight of that. And we'd be remiss not to talk about that in a setting like this.
Thank you. Radmila Milicic with Independent Power Producers of New York. I'm hoping you could explain a little bit further what is the relationship between the newly initiated PSC proceeding and the existing ISO stakeholder process, and how will those processes proceed together or separate from each other,
sure,
or meet in the middle?
Go back to my remarks earlier. The new proceeding, so to speak, is really an administrative vehicle to allow us to set up a place where documents can be filed and accessed so that it has a matter number. It actually is not a proceeding in the traditional proceeding type of the way. And I won't even begin to understand how the NYISO does this stuff. But the important thing that I want to mention again is that from today to some point when there's a proposal that we all have worked on and said, gee, this may work, that is going to be driven by a joint team made up of NYISO staff and DPS staff. And again, informed and enhanced and advanced by all the stakeholder input from all the various venues, including ones that we jointly do together, like the technical conference. Once that proposal is done, then the formal governance and procedural processes take place. So that proposal clearly would have to be submitted to the formal governance process of the NYISO, of which you all, many of you here, are much more familiar with than I am. And assuming there are elements that touch upon regulatory policy, a proceeding would be launched, and ultimately the commissioners will make the decision. Our job as staff is to develop the issue, present the issue, vet the issue, and eventually bring something for the commissioners' consideration. But the commissioners will be deciding. We're just a vehicle in that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Oh, I thought we were done.
No, not quite. I'm sorry. Erin Hogan. I'm with the Utility Intervention Unit. Scott, I have a process question as well. It seems as though we are going to be given an opportunity, I think as Brad characterized it, kick the wheels for the modeling assumptions. And I'm just trying to understand the timing of what you laid out. I'm questioning if we could have an opportunity to kick the wheels, have some discussions, perhaps I think you were saying technical conferences on borders and seams and revenue allocation. I almost think we should understand those underlying assumptions. I think to Dave Clark's point of what's going on, where things are being built, how will power possibly flow? You looked at 1 year, 2025. Is that really sufficient? Should we test the waters a little bit more with some different loads, different years? And so I just think from an order of operations, I almost think we should be looking at those modeling assumptions and kicking the wheels a little bit more before we get too far ahead of ourselves.
So I don't want to get my friend Sam nervous, but I don't, this is just my view, and we'll take the point back, because we all know that kicking the tires is important. The question is, what are we kicking the tires of, and how best to do that in an efficient way? For example, I'm assuming somewhere in this room or out in the webcast world, somebody's going to say, I got a better idea than Brattle. And here's my set of assumptions, and here's our approach. And my thought, subject to it's all kicking around, is let's get those other ideas in the next 6 weeks or so, and then decide what tires do we want kicked? How do we want to do it? It's not like we're taking the Brattle report and saying, okay, are we ready to implement this, and what are... suffice it to say, the DPS team has lots of questions about the assumptions. We all do. I'm just going to suggest that it may be more efficient and effective, rather than doing that iteratively, to see what other frameworks come in, what other sets of assumptions might be suggested. And then I know that the NYISO team and the state NYSERD and DPS team will be looking to see how do we marshal up our resources even provide a first level analysis. I don't disagree with you.
Okay.
And we'll continue to talk about what the best sequencing is. But I don't want anybody to think that the Brattle assumptions are being baked in at all.
Okay, fair enough. But instead of characterizing it as iterative, perhaps we could do it concurrently. And if Brattle could share the models, I believe they just said it was a static Excel model, if you could share it and let folks play with it a little bit, because it could help inform the proposals come November 1st.
That's a very good point. I don't want to put Sam on the spot now, but we'll discuss that. I think that's a very good point.
Okay. And, you know, I'm just going to say something because I've been doing this for many years, starting with the State Energy Plan, I think, in about 2001. And, you know, I know there's a lot of people in this room that have different perspectives. There's those who don't want combined cycle, there's those who don't want nuke, and there's those who don't want transmission, yet they want, you know, the emissions to go down. And the reality is, and I think Stu queued up the first, probably the most challenging part, is to maintain reliability. And then the other part is to achieve the environmental goals. And then the third part is trying to do this at the most cost-effective way possible. And I'm raising this solely because I really am asking people to come at it with a pragmatic perspective. Often people look at it as if we're going to optimize to achieve the perfect of all three. And I think really what we do is ultimately choose the least imperfect solution. And so if we don't come at it with a little pragmatic, I think it's going to, or pragmatism, I think it's going to take a hell of a lot longer than 3 years to get this figured out. So I just ask everybody if they can come into it with that perspective.
What a great message to end today on. I don't want to interrupt that at all. Thank you, Erin. Thank you all very much. We'll be spending a lot of time together. Thank you for coming out today.